So now we dive into the power of emotion. So far, we've been talking and talking and talking about how your whole system works and how we can sort of begin to shift it. When I talked about your common connection system and I talked about your fear response system, one of the last things I said in the last video was that both of those systems are driven by emotion. It's not like one has emotion and the other doesn't. And again, I do not use emotion in a negative context at all. What I believe that we should be doing, and there's a lot of research to show this, is that we should identify clusters of emotions that are healthy for us and clusters of emotion that are unhealthy for us. Because as crazy and chaotic and ungrounded as anxiety-filled emotion can be, well-grounded emotion may be the best asset you can develop. You can't provide meaning for your life without calmness or clarity or confidence or passion. Meaning makes our life, and you can't thrive without having some kind of meaning. Being grounded in your calm and connection system doesn't mean you're void of emotion. It actually means that you're grounded in what is really life-generating emotion. And so what this video is about is really trying to pull apart what emotion is, what the impact of emotion in a positive context. Again, I don't like to use the words positive and negative, so I'm going to use life generating, but just so you know that that's kind of what I'm talking about. What life generating emotion looks like as opposed to life degenerating emotion. And you got a glimpse of that last week when you did your emotional charting exercise. So I'm actually going to ask you to refer back to that emotional charting exercise. So if you can pull that up on your Word document or however you wrote it down, I'd like you to pull that back up because we're going to start talking about that, about kind of what that emotional charting exercise looks like, what it can teach you, because we're going to refer back to that a lot. So you're going to need to keep that handy because we're going to keep referring back to that kind of in the next several weeks of the semester, because it can really teach us a lot. And so that's kind of where we're going with this video. So before we dive straight into emotion, what I'm going to talk about is the field of psychology. And I want you to think about kind of a continuum here. And in this continuum, on the far left side, we're talking about low levels of mental health. And over here, we're talking about high sense of well-being. And the field of psychology historically has really focused on this area. What it's done is that it's looked at mental health problems, and rightfully so, and how to fix mental health problems. And the problem with that was that uh, so for people with mental health, obviously it was really important. It's a very, very, very important aspect to be studying. But there was kind of a whole area over here that people were getting okay enough and just kind of staying there, right? And so there were two people, two very, very high people in the field of psychology talking about this. They actually met on a beach in Hawaii one day, and one of them happened to be the president of the American Psychological Association. And they were having this discussion, and in the discussion they were really talking about the importance of their field and that they weren't really looking at people that were really thriving and people that were kind of existing up here. And what about those people? How do we as a profession of psychology really look what's going on here and how we get here? Because what we were finding out was that not being sick didn't necessarily mean to lead to being well. And maybe part of the profession should be focusing on what it meant to really be well. So these two men, and I'm going to try to, I'm close. Martin Seligman and Mike Csikszentmihalyi were these two men. Martin Seligman was the the father of positive psychology, they called him at the time. And what they decided was that they needed to be studying people that were up here, people that were really thriving in their life. And so what they did is they started studying people all over the world. It started just in the United States, and then kind of the research was so important, they started looking at cultures all over the world. And what they found were that people that were thriving up here, successful in whatever success meant to them or their culture at the time, it wasn't necessarily monetarily successful, but how whatever they were doing to be successful or really be well, is that they were making an intention to be well. So, in other words, not being sick got us to okay enough, but if we really wanted to be well, we needed to make that the overt focus. We had to have intentionality to be well. And so then what happened is the whole discipline of positive psychology was born. And positive psychology tells us that to be well, we need to make the focus of being well. We have to intentionally cultivate being well. It's not just about not being sick. And so then, and that was actually before the field of neuroscience started really looking at emotion. And so once neuroscience started looking at emotion, what we realized is that is absolutely true from a psychophysiological sense as well. What happens is we mold to more of our same experience. So if we're just trying to not be sick, we mold to not being sick. It's good, but it's not great. And so if we really want to be well, what we need to do is we need to make that the focus. We need to be able to um, uh, from a psychophysiological standpoint, we need to create the experience of something up here that then again cultivates the capacity for more of the same. So it's kind of all the same things that we've been talking about, but it was really kind of zeroed in on the field of positive psychology, and then validated by the world of neuroscience. So, what neuroscience and positive psychology can tell us together is that to be emotionally well, we need to intentionally cultivate emotional wellness. And again, this is what I've been saying the whole semester. It's not just about reducing your fear response system, it's about actively cultivating your calm and connection system. So let's go to your back to your emotional chart exercise. And if you can, pull that out, please, so you can have your own example of what you worked on last week. And I was very, very intentional about the way I asked you to do that. What I asked you to do was write words that for you made you feel authentically good above the line, and for you what made you feel authentically bad below the line, and really deeply good or deeply bad, not just whimsical. I got a popsicle and I feel good. um, because again, emotion gets displayed in our physiological imprint by what our experience of that emotion, not necessarily what we think it should be. In other words, I used the example last week. If you were told you were loved, but you were hit at the same time, or you were betrayed by love, your physical experience of the word love is going to be very different. And so, what we're looking at is our true physical experience of the words. So, the physical imprint of the words above the line for you would be life generating, because that carries the physiological imprint of positive biochemistry, positive neural nets, positive coherent heart coherence waves, and those below the line for you would be life degenerating. And again, I don't use positive and negative because there's a lot to learn from those below the line, and we're going to talk about those much more in depth later. It's not about above is good and below is bad and just forget about the bad. That's absolutely not what I'm talking about at all. But there are some tools, first of all, to be in one of those states, either above the line or below the line, for any significant amount of time. Then you do create the capacity for more than of the same. So the ones below the line are really good information for us. about what's going on for us emotionally and how we might be able to heal those. It's not about suppressing them. If we try to suppress, they're still going to be there. It's not about suppressing, it's not about pretending they don't exist, but it's about holding them in a different way. And we're going to come back to those below the line, so just hang with me. But I'm just going to give you some tools. And again, I talked about these really briefly in the resilience lecture, but I want to get a little bit deeper into them and just really kind of give you some real tangible tools to start implementing in your day-to-day life. So if you look at all the things that you wrote above the line, again, those are what for you are life generating emotions. And again, everybody's going to be different. Everybody's going to have different words in different places. But for you, those are life-generating emotions. So there's a lot we can learn from that. Number one is what we call the 3-to-1 ratio. If you can be above the line 3 moments to 1 moment below the line, huge shifts in your neuroscientific way of reflecting your life begin to shift. And in the world of neuroscience, little shifts become big shifts, become your dominant way of being. And so that makes it doable, because number one, um, nobody expects you to be up there all the time. It's not human nature to be up above the line every moment of every day. And if you are, you're pretending. And if you're pretending, it's not your authentic experience. This really needs to be your authentic experience. But when you keep that 3-to-1 ratio in your mind, what that does then is sometimes it's an easy shift. Sometimes it's an easy shift. And again, I always say shift when you can, heal when you can't. But sometimes, and we'll come back to what that healing means later, but sometimes it's an easy shift. Sometimes I can just be driving to work or walking to class or whatever, and I can be focusing on all the things that are going wrong in my life, all the things that I'm upset about, or I can focus on all the things that I'm grateful for. And the truth is, both stories are true. But if the story I focus on becomes the story of my life, then maybe my attention is a little bit, I should be a little bit more aware of my attention. And it just makes us more aware of the power of every moment. If I know that I have a 3-to-1 ratio and I just need to tip that scales to the top of the chart more often than below the chart, and I keep that in my awareness, then I make a greater intention to be there more often. And then when I'm not there, it's okay. I don't have to beat myself up for it, because you know what? Blame, shame, judgment for not being above the line just brings you back down below the line. So it's not about being perfect. It's just about shifting when you can. And the more moments of shift that you can create in your life begin to really, really build up. And so if you just keep this 3-to-1 ratio in mind and just keep that, when you pay attention to your attention and then remember the 3-to-1 ratio, then it's like, oh, okay, maybe I should just be focusing on the flowers while I'm walking by, or stopping and having meaningful conversation, or I'm a dog person, petting a dog, or, calling my mom, or that's if you like your mom. Whatever it is, just taking those moments can begin to shift. So then the next piece of that is, it doesn't necessarily need to be things that are external to you. There's something called micro moments, which are moments that you create. I talked last week about the craziness of cortisol and the craziness of cortisol baths, and cortisol baths are just your thought process. And, it's kind of like having an IV bag of cortisol on your arm all day long and squishing it every time you have a stressful moment. Well, the opposite can be true too. Oxytocin is a hormone that functions a lot like the opposite of cortisol. It's not the opposite of cortisol, but it functions a lot like the opposite, because it's very different in what it does. And when your oxytocin levels are high, your cortisol levels are low. It really is an opposing hormone. And so you can give yourself IV bag shots just like the low cortisol baths, only of oxytocin all day long. And the more that you do that, again, oxytocin is kind of a fleeting hormone. So just doing it interspersed all throughout your day really begins to make the biochemical shifts that counterbalance all the biochemical shifts of your fear response system. So a micro moment is a moment that you create. Stop and have a meaningful conversation with somebody. Stop and just create extra moments that are micro moments of connection, micro moments of engaging your calm and connection system. So it doesn't always it's a little different. The 3-to-1 ratio is just trying to tip the scales, and it all often has to do with the things that are going on externally. Micro moment, you can create as many micro moments as there are in a day just by creating that little shift. That little shift, again, instead of the low-grade cortisol bath, it's the oxytocin bath. Create those shifts all day long throughout your day, and begins to really tip the scales. That can tip the 3-to-1 ratio, and then again create, in the world of neuroscience, little changes add up to basically be the dominant system of your life. The next tool again is cementing the good, or noticing the good. I think in the book it's noticing the good. It's just taking moments. The good things happen to us all day long, and most of the time we're not aware, or we're aware but we're just fleetingly aware, because right immediately we're off on the negative thought or to anticipating the next bad thing that's going to happen. And again, you create a physiological imprint of every moment. And when good things happen, if you can just pause and soak it in, it's almost like you're trying to make a cellular memory of that moment, then that also really begins to change that physiological imprint that we were talking about, which again begins to change that whole spiral of becoming to an upward spiral instead of a downward spiral. So 3-to-1 ratio, micro moments, cementing the good. There's also something in your book that you're going to read about called heartful breathing. Heartful breathing is basically, it's one of the tools that you're going to be doing in the class, and it's really basically intentionally breathing the opposite of what you might be feeling that's problematic. In other words, if you're getting ready to do a presentation and you're really nervous, instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so nervous, I gotta calm down, I'm so nervous, you just intentionally breathe the experience of calm. Right? So instead of just trying to push something else down, you're actively engaging in the opposite. So heartful breathing is like, breathing in a heartful state, or in a connected state of an emotional state that is the opposite of what you might be feeling. But again, instead of trying to suppress one, you're just actively engaging in the other. It's a whole different shift. Okay, so again, you got 3-to-1 ratio, micro moments, cementing the good, and heartful breathing. Those are what your focus is going to be this week. You're going to write your reflection on the 3-to-1 ratio and micro moments, and then your resilience tools for this week are going to be micro moments, cementing the good, and heartful breathing. And all three of those, both your assignment and the resilience tools, are explained in the links below. So don't forget all those tools. Don't forget the power of emotion. It's not just about reducing the bad. It's about actively cultivating the good. Positive psychology and neuroscience together have both proven that to really live well, to be well, you need to be intentionally cultivating that wellness. And again, because our fear response system and our common connection system are both dominated by emotion, the question isn't whether emotion is good or bad, is what clusters are healthy for us and what clusters are not healthy for us. Emotion gives meaning to our life. We just need to be able to reduce the ones that are chaotic, and cultivating a dominant fear response system to those that are life generating and cultivating a common connection system.